Kanban, like chocolate and peanut butter. I'm delighted to have an excellent speaker. This is an encore presentation for us, and I'll introduce the speaker in a minute. The topic today is Scrum and Kanban. As you are probably familiar, Kanban has been a very popular topic in the last couple of years in the Agile community. And what we're going to cover today is how Kanban really fits in with Scrum and XP, which are the more prevalent Agile practices out there today, and really help you mix and match the practices from Scrum and Kanban in your specific situations, whatever they may be. So that's the topic at hand. And like I said, this is an encore presentation. We have had a lot of demand for this particular topic, and this is a really good one. I'm delighted to have Damon Poole as a presenter for this topic. Damon is the CTO and founder for AccuRev, which is a product development tools company. And he is a regular presenter. In fact, I've attended a number of his presentations in Agile World Conference every year, and most of those presentations tend to be standing room only. So we're delighted to have Damon present this topic with us here. Damon is a methodology and process improvement expert, and he has worked with many companies, small and large, helping them really fine-tune their process. So with that, Damon, over to you. And just one housekeeping note to the audience, that please keep sending your questions along in the Q&A panel of GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar rather, and I'll keep track of them. Wherever the questions make sense, I'll pick them up and inject them for Damon along the way, and otherwise we'll hold some questions which are more cross-cutting for the end and take them all towards the end. With that, over to you, Damon.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hopefully I can live up to that. So I always like to start talking about, why bother? Why should you, listen to this whole presentation? Why this presentation at all? And, I think sometimes with Agile, many times people are looking to learn, the particular lingo or jargon or something like that. And I always want to make sure that the value that you're going to get from this is very clear. And so I want to talk a little bit about value in general. And to start that out, to talk about who's the customer. So really the value that I hope to provide is to give you some ideas in how to provide more value to your customer. But for that to be important to you, it has to be the right customer. Because if you have an internal business unit and the value of engineering is perceived as implementing, some percentage of requirements, where 100% of requirements implemented is an A, shall we say, and something less than that is, well, not to be desired, then it's going to be difficult to see some of the real value that Agile, Scrum, or Kanban can provide, right? So, because if you've got a budget for your department, for your IT group or whatever, of a certain amount of money, and then you fulfill the requirements and you have the same budget next year, right, then it doesn't seem like there's a lot that you can do to help with the top line, because really you're just implementing requirements. So I think, one of the things that we can learn from Agile is to think of the business unit as part of the development team, so that you have your offering to the market, which previously we were thinking of as the customer of the business unit. And if you don't have that situation, if you have multiple customers and they're out in the field and you sell a software product, or you have software that's part of an embedded product, in any case, it's the end user that you want to think of as your customer. And that if you make that customer happier, then your business is going to prosper more, and you're going to get more customers. That's who I think of as the customer, right? The eventual end user of your offering, and that your team encompasses both development and the business side. That there's just the group that produces software, and within them they have business experience and expertise as well. So that, when I say the customer, is who I mean. So then the next question is, how do you influence return on investment? And in development, we might not talk about return on investment that much, but it's really very important, because, you think about it, where does your salary come from? Where does your bonus come from? What influences whether there's going to be a layoff, or hiring, or creating a new product? It's the return on investment, right? And in development, maybe we don't think about that, but it is important. And so let's think about how that provides value, right? So you have the investment, which means the money you're going to invest in something, or the cost. You can look at it as the cost. And from from that investment, we get the software. That software is what provides the value. Now, again, if you're providing it to a business unit, it's really the business unit providing the value, but they're providing the value using the software. So we're going to think of the value that the software provides in that context. Now, the actual value may or may not be money. For instance, if Greenpeace is out there saving whales, then the value is how many whales did we save, right? So the software that they're using there may be to locate whales or to coordinate boats, whatever it is. But for them, they want to save whales. They may be putting a man on the moon, and you could argue that there's no monetary value from that because, well, there are no trading partners up there, and pretty much all that they have to offer is moon rocks. But there's the value for the country and for the scientific learning, right? So clearly somebody put value on that, and we went. You could think about saving people from natural disasters. Again, like the whales, software that coordinates rescue efforts, and the value there is how many human lives do you save. And lastly, of course, there's the value that we get personally. I got a raise, or I got a promotion, and I got more vacation. I can spend more time on a more beautiful beach. That's fantastic. So, the value can come in a lot of different ways. That value eventually is your return, and that's how you get the return on investment. Now, that's pretty clear. So there's a couple of aspects here that I wanted to talk about. One is just to go through this exercise, but the other one is to think about, often in development, we think of the return on investment as being a fairly static thing, right? So let me ask you this. Now, I can't do this, I can only do this with a live audience, but usually what I'll do is I'll ask somebody, who wants to volunteer to double their money? However much money you give me right now, if you give me a 10, I'll give you 20. However much money you give me right now, I'll double it. And I usually get a volunteer, and I'll take the 10 bucks, and then I'll say thank you. And by the way, you'll get that return in 20 years, right? So the value, there's the time value of money too. If you look at these particular investment opportunities, investment A, B, C, and D, they each have a cost, and I've made it the same to make it simple. But the return, it looks like A is the best thing. However, the red line indicates the value that it's going to take to recoup that return on investment, and it's the idea of, should I have left the money in the bank? Would I have made more money as an investment leaving that money in the bank rather than producing some new software? So since A is going to come so late in the game, actually there's really no point in doing it, right? There's not a good return on investment there. And in fact, D, which looks like a smaller return, is actually the best value for money. So why am I bringing up all this financial stuff, which, why is that important? Well, it's all getting back to the fact that we want to provide value to the end customer. We want to maximize that value. And one of the ways to help with that is to get that value back as soon as you possibly can, right? Now, you may say, well, I can't release my software every week or every month, or as some people do multiple times per day. I release it, it's part of an embedded system, and I release it every year. So I don't know how I can take advantage of this. But remember that learning also has value. If you do a small increment of work and you realize right away, oh, the fundamental underlying assumption that I had about this particular technology that we plan to use is flawed, we're going to have to change this right away. So if you're doing small increments over time, you're going to also learn things as you go. So it's not just the monetary value, it's also the learning that you get. So at the end of the day, what I think the takeaway from this particular part is that there is something that I like to call software development nirvana, which is this is the best possible way to create software right here. Right? You've got stories coming in, requests from the customers, and you turn them around really fast. You get a small team, you're getting things done, you're getting the value back very rapidly. What is a better way to develop software than this, right? To the extent that you can do it, right? If you need a lot more people, then it's not going to work. But really, this is the best way to produce software. What's a better way? Well, the suggestions I usually get back with a live audience is to get rid of the blue box, just take the stories and the money, but don't deliver anything. That would be better. Well, I agree that that's probably true. At some point, I think people are going to say, hey, I need some product here. So really, there's no way to improve it. This is the best. And the reason it's the best is because you're getting a continuous flow of working software, getting feedback right away. If there's any problems, you're getting that feedback right away. You're getting the value to the team, right? The company is getting value from the customer back on a regular basis. So to the extent that you can do this, it makes sense to turn things around rapidly and get feedback rapidly. Now again, it may be that you can only release once a year, but getting feedback from people, showing them a demo and having them say, oh, you're going in the wrong direction, has a lot of value. Or, hey, we got a technical decision we made that's wrong. Figuring that out early is very valuable. So you've got continuous flow of working software, and as you get stories done, you can use those as checkpoints. Is our process working well? Have we got the right people on the team? You know, do we need to replace a build machine? Do we, you know, what is the issue? So every time you get a story done in this software development Nirvana, you're getting feedback on your whole process, right? So it's fast, small increments and maximum value. Now, obviously, you know, with just a tester, a doc person, and a developer, there are some projects that you're just not going to be able to do, right? So this doesn't necessarily scale with just these 3 people. But, right, the way to look at it is this is the best way, this is the best possible software development. And then, you know, what can we learn from this? So we have to have a starting point. So there's something that we all do that is fast, a small increment, and is the maximum value the company could possibly produce. Think about what that might be. Something we all do, fast, small increment, maximum possible value at that particular point in time. I'll give you a clue. Not all value is clearly positive. Sometimes to get that positive value, it's actually the negation of a loss of value. So what could that be? Well, it's a hot fix, right? Everybody has hot fixes. Everybody has customers that, you know, there's something going wrong and there's a problem in the software that needs to be fixed immediately. So what do you do when that comes up? Well, you do a hot fix because it is the maximum value that your organization can produce at this time, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't do the hot fix. And you've got to get it out there fast, because if you tell the customer, well, you know, we've got a yearly release cycle and we're 6 months in, so you're going to have to wait 6 months for us to get that done, then your thing will be in the next release, it'll be a year and a half, you're probably going to lose that customer. So that's why we do hot fixes. We're removing the loss of value that's represented by an unhappy customer that has their system down or whatever it is. You have to get it done. You have to do it fast. What gets in the way of a hot fix? Absolutely nothing. Saying Joe is on vacation or sick, not acceptable. We got to figure that out, find somebody else, get that done. So I'm going to put this thought out to you. Why don't we do everything as a hot fix? I don't mean running around with your hair on fire, but why don't we do everything as a hot fix? So I'll leave you to that for a moment. Okay, so why bother? Because there's a potential for higher value. So before we get into Kanban, let's take a quick look at Scrum and set up a framework for looking at Kanban. I assume that, you know, a lot of you are already using Scrum, so let's take a look at that. All right, so I've broken out product management separately because later we'll have multiple teams that we're talking about here. We have customers that provide stories. We take the top stories out of the backlog. We put it into our iteration. We plan on doing it. We've got the team. Some point during the iteration, and there's always more work to do from the customers. That backlog is never ending. Some point during the iteration, your Scrum board will look like this. Now, whether you're using a Scrum board or not, conceptually, you're going to have, during the iteration, you're going to have some things that are work in progress, some things that are tested but not yet done, some things that are done, and you might not necessarily have these column names, these stages, but it's going to look something like this, whether you have a Scrum board or not. And then eventually we'll be done, and then we'll take that and we'll ship it to the customer, or be able to ship it to the customer. We may not ship it to the customer. We may just show it to them and say, what do you think? But that really should be shippable. It should be in a state that you could ship it if you wanted to. Whether you do or not is up to you. So that's the basics of Scrum. Now, there are some problems with Scrum. One of the most basic problems with Scrum is that it's discontinuous as far as cadence goes, right? So we do an iteration and we stop. We do another iteration and we stop. But really, remember, software development Nirvana is always delivering value, or being able to deliver value, constantly working. So that's one issue with Scrum. Another issue with Scrum is when I've got multiple teams, I need to coordinate them somehow, right? So I can have individual backlogs and all that kind of stuff. Eventually, I'm going to have to integrate things together. Now, I imagine, you know, like at our company, we have what we like to call integration party week. That's a great time. No, not so much. Maybe merge hell month. Yeah. Integrating things together is generally painful. Now, one of the issues with this, if you have multiple Scrum teams, is this integration, this continuous integration, right? What continuous integration says is we're supposed to integrate continuously. But what often happens with multiple Scrum teams that need to interact is that they integrate every iteration. And so you have an integration iteration. The problem with that is shippable means the whole product is shippable, not just your team's effort, right? And if you're going to be integrating on a regular basis to work from multiple teams, you're going to get that integration pain right up front. So that's an issue. And we'll talk more about how to solve that. But you can't say you're shippable until you're fully integrated across the whole product. Things like hardening, stabilization iterations, no. This is not Agile. Often people start out that way, but that's not the goal. You want to be really shippable across the whole product at the end of every iteration. Yes, I understand that's hard. Maybe your testing is not automated, and that takes a long time. But these are challenges, not reasons to not do it. So saying that, okay, the thing we're going to do is development works for a month, and then we take the result of that, and then QA works on that for the next month. Those are called offset iterations, and that's also a red flag. So a lot of problems here. At the end of the day, we don't have visibility into cross-product problems until the end of an iteration, or maybe a week or even a month after that, because we're not integrated across the whole product. So that's the problem. So those are just some of the problems, but those tend to be some of the most painful problems. Now let's take a bird's eye view of Kanban. What is this thing called Kanban? And I want to stress that I'm not saying that you should just switch to Kanban, that the Scrum is no good and you switch over. Much like with extreme programming and things like, not many people actually do pair programming, but there's incremental design, refactoring, continuous integration. These are all things that come from XP. Most people doing Scrum successfully have mixed in things from XP, and that's what I'm saying with Kanban. Let's mix things in. So what does it look like? 3 simple things. First of all, it's a visual system of managing work. So if you already have a Scrum board or a storyboard, task board, whatever you want to call it, you're sort of already partway along the road. So you just say, all right, these are the columns I want. Right? You take your backlog, you put it in the to-do list, work right, whatever your columns are. You're visualizing the work so that you can see, is stuff bunching up? Am I starting to get gridlock somewhere? Have I got a bunch of code being written that doesn't pass testing? That's good to know, because maybe we should slow down on coding and figure out what's going on with testing. It also limits the amount of work in progress, right? So here I've put in hard limits. What are the exact number of stories per column that you should limit? That's a whole science. I'm not going to get into that, but the idea is if I put a limit in there, then when I go over the limit, or I'm about to go over the limit, I know I probably have a problem. I should have no more than 3 stories in progress. If I have 4, that probably means QA is behind. Maybe I should stop and help them. Maybe I'm injecting bugs into the system, and I need to figure out what they are so that they can move forward and I can get back to coding or what have you, whatever your particular situation is. So limiting work in progress is an important key goal there. And lastly, work is pulled through, and that's related to limiting the work in progress. So the only way I can move a story from stage to stage is if there is a place for it, right? So I can only move things along when there's a place, and that's why it's called a pull system. You're always pulling issues, stories, defects, what have you, through your workflow. And that's basically it. Much like Go or even checkers, it's simple to learn. It can take a lifetime to master, but that doesn't mean that you have to master it before you start getting the benefits. You can start getting the benefits right away. But it is a relatively simple system. So I'm going to show you a visualization of what this is, and I'll warn you, this is not for the faint of heart. If you become dizzy, just look away for a moment. Hopefully the feeling will pass. And if you've been doing Scrum, you may think, wow, this is going to really kill the team. That's too fast. But remember, the idea with Agile is a sustainable pace, right? So here's Kanban in action. Customers updating, talking to the product owner, with new story requests going to the backlog. As things get done, we pull them off the next column, pull, and eventually we're pulling things off the backlog, And we just go and go and go. As each story is done, it's integrated, and you have a product that's ready to ship. Now, whether you ship it or not, that's up to you. But you have something you can ship at the end of every story. Now, in practice, that can be a hard goal to attain, but to the extent that you can do it, you're going to get more and more value. And many companies these days are able to actually do this. So in many ways, this is exactly the same as Scrum, except you don't necessarily wait until the end of the iteration to say, I'm done. You get a story pulled through, it's done. Okay, so one-piece flow. I've often asked how many people are familiar with one-piece flow or small batch size, and it's not a lot.
Damon, can we take one question while before you move off to the next topic?
Sure.
So the question here is, you talked a lot about Kanban and how it works with Scrum. Can you say a few things about how this process works with XP?
Yeah, I don't have as much material on that, but the basic idea is the same. And so let's just keep going, and then at the end, if it's not clear, let's come back to that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so it turns out that whether you've heard it or not, the key to a successful Scrum implementation is actually this concept of one-piece flow, and we'll see why that is. And one-piece flow is something that is very powerful, and it's something that is emphasized in Kanban. And you may see as we go through it, you may realize, oh yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. Now I can see why our team is successful and that other team over there is not having as much success. You may and say, oh, that explains exactly why we're having that problem. So let's talk about it. What is one-piece flow? Well, for any particular user story that you're going to do, regardless of the size, it has a couple of different components. You're going to have to specify design code. And whether you call it these things exactly or not doesn't really matter. You know, for specify, that's you've got a user story, you understand it, or you talk to the product owner and ask a question. Let's update that. Eventually, you have what you want specified. Now, you may have some more detailed stuff behind that UML, but whatever you call it, and you design. Well, how are we going to do this? You code it, integrate it, and generally the last three, the end user documentation, writing tests, and actually testing, those are optional, of course, as we all know. But no, I'm just kidding. Sometimes it seems like that way, but the idea is, and I'm going to hopefully color code it. We've got a release that we need to get out, and we have all these stories, all different shapes and sizes. If you think of any particular story and I were to look at it, let's say one story, I'm working on a pacemaker. One story is for updating some web page as part of the diagnostic for the pacemaker. And I have another story, which is for changing the algorithm that regulates the rhythm of the heart. And you're a QA person. Which one are you going to put more attention into? Pretty clearly the one that regulates the rhythm of the heart. And you're going to say, all right, that requires this much attention, the updated web page, this much attention. For any particular story, there's a certain responsible amount of attention that you're going to give each story. And the basic idea is you sum up whatever that attention is, which turns out at the end of the day to be time, and say that's the amount of effort we have to put into testing. Okay, so keep that thought in mind for a moment. Now, if we look within a particular iteration at one story, at all the different phases and when they happen for that one story, hopefully early on you're specifying what you want to do, and then at some point later, do the design. Maybe the design is earlier, later, whatever. At some point, whoever's going to work on that story, pick that story, is going to start working on it. But it's not necessarily right after when it was specified or right after it was designed. And at some later point, integrated, test written, and test run, and documented, and all that kind of stuff. But I'll ask you, think about somebody that's written code. And if you write code or have written code, you can think about that. But anyway, you've got a coder and yesterday, and you ask him, hey, what did you do and why did you do it yesterday? He's probably going to remember it and be able to give it to you in excruciating detail. But what about a month ago? And how well do you remember what you were doing exactly a month ago? Why and how? It's more difficult, right? That was a month ago. But if a QA person comes into the coder's cube and says, hey, I've now detected after 2 weeks that there's a problem here. Can you explain to me why it works this way? The developer is often or is likely going to say, what, me? I'm pretty sure that's not my code. Actually, it is. But hey, it's been 2 weeks, so maybe you don't remember that well. Right, so that's a problem. We're only human. What can we do about that? Well, before we look at that, let's look at how big of a problem this is, right? So if I look at all of the stories within an iteration, I've got a whole bunch of stories here, and when the various phases of working on them happen, it might look something like this. But if I squint, what do I see? I see like a specification phase, I see a design phase, a coding phase. Hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? This testing phase at the end, I'm squeezed. We agreed to a certain amount of a certain responsible amount of attention we're going to give to those tests, but now you're telling me I've only got a couple days left. Well, I guess I better do some risk mitigation and figure out which stuff really. No, you already decided the responsible amount. Any cutting or risk mitigation you do now is actually, by definition, being irresponsible. This is not good. Well, what can we do? Well, what we can do is we can focus on the goal, which is the stuff on the right. The top is for the American audience, the bottom is for the international audience. Getting the goal important. Making progress towards the goal has no value until you can ship it. Saying I've got some code written, I don't care. If it's not tested and integrated and ready to ship, it has no value. I can't get anything for it. Right? So the thing to do is to focus on getting to the goal, one goal at a time. Don't start a whole bunch of stories all at once. You've got this one story, get it done. Get it all the way to shippable before you start working on anything else. Now you have multiple developers, so you can't have them all working on the same story. But, for instance, if you think about for the team that you've got, how many hot fixes could they do simultaneously without slowing down any of those hot fixes? If you think you could work on 3 hot fixes at a time and get those out just as fast as if you were working on one of them, right, so none of them are delayed, okay, then you should be working on, let's say, 3 stories at a time and no more. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. It's a guideline. You want to work on as few stories as you possibly can and get them done as fast as you possibly can. So that when the QA person comes right back and says, you know, I don't think this works right, the developer remembers that and can work on it right away with no delay, no getting up to speed time, and any problems are not left until the end. Because if you've got 20 stories in progress and they all come together at the end and none of them are working, why aren't they working? It could be for any of 20 reasons. Any of 20 stories could have injected problems in that are affecting 20 times 20. It's a complex problem. But if you're working on stories as you go through, you're reducing the complexity of the problem and saying, well, this new story is, you know, it was working before. It's probably the problem is within this story. So it reduces debugging and complexity and all that kind of stuff. So you want to do every single story as fast as you possibly can, story by story. And if you look at this now, for instance, picking on testing phase now, testing is spread throughout the entire iteration, and QA people can pick things up as fast as they need to, and they can be productive all the way through. And sure, you can multitask and work on other projects while you're waiting, but by definition, you are then not working on the most important thing, and you are multi-thread, which has been proven to be inefficient. Okay, so that's now we've looked at Kanban, we've looked at one-piece flow. How can we start applying some of these things that we've looked at in Kanban to Scrum? There's some very basic things you can do. First off, you can use a task board and visualize the work you have. Next, you can implement limited work in progress. You don't have to limit the to-do. You can say the to-do is our whole increment of the iteration. And hey, we're never going to have more than 3 stories in work in progress, never have more than 3 things coded but not yet tested, right? And it can be like a rumble strip. You know, you're driving down the road, you hit the rumble strip, you're like, oh, I got to get back on the road. Now, sometimes you need to go over that rumble strip. Maybe somebody's driving up behind you and you've got no other place to go. So you go to the rumble strip, you know what you're doing, and then you get back. So they don't have to be hard limits. But it lets you know something may be wrong. Now, again, where to set these limits exactly, that's kind of a science. You'll have to tune that. But having the limits, that's the important thing. Okay. Now, another thing that you're going to do, a thing that is helpful when you're doing Kanban is if you need stories to get done on a regular basis and then be able to test them and show them and document them with screenshots and all that kind of stuff, that means that stories need to be able to flow through. Because otherwise, right, the only version of the product, the blue box represents the version of the product you could build is whatever the heck has been checked in, whether it's, you know, done or not. If it's checked in, that's what I can build. So if instead, for each stage, you associate a stream or a branch or what have you in your tools, in any case, you have an environment to do continuous integration with stories that are in a particular stage, then a story can move through the gauntlet from stage to stage, and you isolate things, right? So now I can build the product as before, which has all of the stories, or I can build a version of the product that only has the stories the developers have said, hey, I'm done coding. It may not be tested yet, but I'm done coding. I think everything that should be in there is in there. You know, I did some basic testing. It's there. And it's not going to be mingled in with the stuff that's work in progress but not stated as done, coded, right? Or I could say, hey, just give me the stories that are tested. They've got whatever testing, automated testing that there needs to be written, run, and passing. And so I can build a version of the product that only has that in there. If you're a product owner, a QA person, or a document, you know, if you're writing documents, just think of how great that is. So for instance, if you're a testing person, you really want to test things. Do you really want to find things in your testing that could have been found by automated tests that were going to be written but have not been written? And if they had and had been written, that they would have been run and would have found whether or not there was any problem? Wouldn't you rather whatever automated testing is going to be run found whatever problems that it could find first, so you're only going to find problems that there is no testing for? I think so. I think that's better, right? So isolating by stage using your SCM and continuous integration tools, not to mention your project management tools, is a great thing from that perspective. Excuse me. Okay, so next to last subject here, we're going to talk about moving away from iterations. Now, I love iterations. Iterations are the best thing since sliced bread. They allow us to time box things and to see whether or not we can actually ship product or not. If we can't ship something after a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is, we got problems. We got to figure them out. So iterations, wonderful thing. Why would I talk about moving away from them? Well, I'm assuming that first, you've mastered iterations. I'm not suggesting that you should move to Kanban without doing Scrum first. Now, there are people out there that can help you with that, and that can be very successful. Not my particular area of expertise. Most of my audience is folks that are doing Scrum or thinking about doing Scrum and then want to improve by adding in Kanban. Okay, so, wow, that's a complex picture. Let me break this down for you. So we've got 2 iterations here. The image on the right is the same as the iteration, the image on the left. So we get 2 iterations. If you look within Scrum, each iteration has a couple of phases, right? So first, we're going to do our retrospective from the past iteration. That's that circle of people with questions. Then we're going to, we're going to get together for the sprint planning, and we're going to manage it. We're going to groom the backlog, and then we're going to do our planning poker, or however we estimate stories. We're going to have every story estimated. We're going to get every story assigned to a developer, whether it's through assignment or the developers picking the stories. Then we're going to do the work for each story, and then when they're done, we're going to say, hey, they're done. And then at the end, we're going to say, we're going to do the iteration review, and that's what the magnifying glass represents, doing the iteration review for that story, okay? So those are the basic phases in Scrum, and then we do it all over again. We retrospect, manage the backlog, etc. Iteration after iteration. Fantastic, love it. Now, you notice that I've also shown without the one-piece flow. So that's sort of, prior to thinking about it this way. After that, we're going to have all these stories done on a regular basis using one-piece flow, thinking of everything as a hotfix or a patch. I get this story done. I'm ready to go. I could ship that story if I wanted to. I move it on to the next story. We still have to do all those other activities that we had before, right? But where are we going to do them? When are we going to do them? Well, we're going to get them done. We already talked about that, so that's pretty clear. We're going to get the things done on a regular basis. We're not going to wait till the end of the iteration. And then for some of the things we need to do, like an iteration review, instead of thinking of it as an iteration review, think of it as a review. Think of it as a review. We're going to review at some regular or even irregular interval all the stories that have been completed since the last time we did a review, right? So I may, at that point in time, have a story in progress. That's fine. I'm not going to review that one. But all stories that are done are in a built and tested version of the product that I can actually review. And so I'm going to have that. And I can do retrospectives whenever it makes sense. If I'm just starting out and I've got a 4-week iteration, I'm going to be doing retrospectives every 4 weeks. But if I get a little bit more advanced and I'm doing iterations of a week, then I'm doing retrospectives every week. Who needs the retrospectives more? I think it's the beginning team. So you can decouple when you do the retrospective from the iteration and just say, all right, you know what, now's a good time to do a retrospective, or keep scheduling it every 2 weeks, every week, every month, whatever makes sense, but it doesn't have to be coupled to an iteration, right? So in software, that's the concept that we have of decoupling things. We want to pull things apart that don't have to be coupled together. It's better to be asynchronous.
Hey, Damon, can we inject a couple of questions here, which are pertinent to the current flow? The first one is, as you're talking about continuous delivery of the stream of features, where is the place for release planning in this?
Okay, that's an excellent question, and I do get asked that a lot. While this is great for continuous delivery, it doesn't mean that you have to deliver continuously. You can, if you have, currently released every year, you could still release every year. It just means that you're getting things done on a regular basis and finding problems a lot quicker and getting that feedback quicker without having to wait to the end of the iteration. And then you have something at the end of whatever period you want to show to people and that kind of stuff. Release planning is a whole other topic, but at the end of the day, whatever release planning you're doing today, you can continue to do.
So your point is you still do upfront release planning, which is to be able to commit to a certain scope of features that are expected to come out in that release.
Yes, you can still do that. That's from my perspective, and that's, like I said, it's a whole other topic. I'm not a big fan of release planning. I think, but to get away from release planning takes a lot of education internally, development, management level, customers, all the way up and down the chain. So that's not something that you can move away from quickly. So if you need to do release planning, keep doing it. Do the upfront work. There's nothing wrong with that. And then I think you'll find over time that as people get things on a more regular basis or can look at them more regularly, then some of the need for that goes away. But really, that's a whole other topic. And I would say that if you need to do release planning, it just means you're going to have to estimate stories out in advance. And for any of these things, I'm not saying that you have to do all of them to be successful. To the extent that you can do the individual things that I'm recommending, that'll provide more value. You can't do them all, you can't do them all, and that's fine.
Let's take one more question, which is also in the same topic that you're covering right now on this page, which is the person is asking about integration testing. So your boxes indicate as if there's a testing at each story level, which there is, of course, but what if some stories are dependent on each other for testing? Where does that testing happen?
Absolutely. So the ultimate goal here, and it sounds like a fantasy, I understand that, is that you do everything that you would do for your entire release process, including integration, testing, regression testing, everything, at the end of every single story. Wow. Probably can't be done, right? Well, not so. So if we look at, there's a new book out called Lean Startups by Eric Ries. He was one of the co-founders of a company called IMView. They release into production and make money 50 times per day. It can be done. Now, I know of one example of folks doing that today, but if you asked me 3 years ago, I would say I only know a couple of examples of people releasing weekly or daily. As we get better at some of these techniques, it becomes easier and easier. And there's so there's the Lean Startup book out there. There's a book by Jez Humble called Continuous Delivery. It's either Continuous Delivery or something else, but Jez Humble anyway. So there's moving to that is not necessarily easier for me to do overnight. And a lot of people still have a lot of manual testing, and so running all that tests on a regular basis is tough. The other thing is that you might only do a sanity level of integration test. Whatever level of integration testing you can do within a few minutes to say, hey, the basic things are there. Logon's working, and a couple of things are working, and we'll do the full suite overnight. And if we catch something overnight, then we'll go back and revisit it the next day. But you're revisiting the next day, not in a month, not in a week. And again, that's a whole topic there. But a lot of smart people put effort into that, and I would highly recommend the book by Jez Humble to more fully address that.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so you also have to do an estimate. But what you can do is put off the estimate for the story until you're just about to do the story. And the easiest way to do some of these, for that one in particular, is that, and for instance, what we do at AccuRev is we don't make it quite this extreme. But on a weekly basis, we get together and we look at what's in the backlog. The individual teams do what's in their individual backlogs, and they estimate out anything that it does not currently have an estimate so that they, got enough for the next iteration, or, in the case of Kanban, for the next month of effort. And what happens is, you've got the product owners moving stuff around, so it might have a whole bunch of stories that are estimated for the next 2 weeks, and then there's a hole, and then for the next week, and then there's a hole, right? So just continuously be keeping the estimates up to date, and with stories and story points, it's really easy because it's not tied directly to how many hours for a particular developer or for your best developer. It's what is the complexity of that particular story. Okay, so you can pull apart when you estimate stories, do it on a regular basis. And in fact, many people doing this, they have team rooms, and you don't have to have a team room, but if you have a team room, you just say, hey, let's throw together an estimate for this story that I'm about to work on. That's the estimate. Okay, great, let's go. And now again, this does say that, maybe if you're doing upfront release planning, this is going to be more difficult, understood. But to the extent you can do this, the better off you will be. And then assigning who's going to work on a particular story, that doesn't have to happen right away either, right? Now, how are you going to do that? Well, it's easier if you have a team room, like if you got instant messenger or something like that. You can, say, hey guys, I'm thinking about working on the story, and then people might come right back and say, well, Joe, you realize you don't know Ruby, right? Or you don't know that technology. Yeah, I know that, but I found somebody to pair program with me, or a mentor to look over my shoulder. And it's I picked this one in particular because it's actually a bug fix, and I think it's a good way for me to learn. Oh, okay, that sounds good. Yeah, go ahead. And if that person is not able to do that or needs, extra help, at least now they're cross-training, or you figured out, or they've figured out, you know what, this really isn't the thing for me, or actually that person's a superstar. That's great. They should do more of that. Let's put more effort into that. And it turns out they're even better doing that than they were, working on a back-end database, which was what they were previously known to be good at. Right, so absolutely that can be decoupled. A couple more things to talk about decoupling is if you're doing a burn down or burn up, then that requires knowing in advance of the iteration what you're going to be doing. But instead of doing it by the iteration, you can do it by a period of time. So for instance, you do trailing 4 weeks, and you might say, well, if I did that and looked at my velocity, it's going to produce a different chart. Absolutely, it will produce a different chart. But let's admit it. You're not, if you got a velocity of 20 points, you're not hitting 20 every iteration. You're doing 20 and then 22 and then 18 and then 10 and then 30, right? It's not all over the map, but there's some variety in there. So it's just going to mean that the noise is in different places, but at the end of the day, you're going to be able to see, am I hitting my expected velocity on a regular basis, or am I not? So it doesn't have to be per iteration. You can totally decouple that. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about decoupling is people talk about, what about the commitment of Scrum? Well, what is that commitment? It's we're committed or else what? Right, what is the penalty? Generally, it has much more to do with the trust thing. And in fact, the latest version of the Scrum Guide replaces the word commitment with forecast. This is what we forecast we're going to do. It's much more important to have trust and say, as a team, we're committed to getting stories done to the best of our ability. And everybody's going to, and on the flip side, we want everybody to leave the team alone until we get it done. So it really requires a two-way street. The product owner may come to you and say, that issue we thought was important that you're not working on yet, switch that with another one. And the developer might say, you know what, I committed to this, but it turns out it requires bending the laws of physics. You can't do it, actually. So trust is much more important than, this generic commitment. No amount of commitment is going to, is going to help if you have a problem that you run into. You've got to solve that problem. Okay, so what does this look like if we do the extreme and we decouple everything? It's going to look a lot like this, just a continuous flow, getting things done. And that's really the important thing, right? Whenever this breaks down, I've got a problem. It might be, a temporary thing like a build machine, or it might be something more systemic, that you have a process issue that you need to address. But getting this heartbeat on a regular basis is a really good thing. It's like if you go for your pulse and your pulse is only, you get a pulse of once per month, it's hard to tell if you're dead or not. But if you have a regular pulse, then if that pulse stops, ooh, I got a problem. I got to address it right away. So one of the things that people often wonder is, I really think you're talking about switching to Kanban. Isn't that really what you're saying? Well, Kanban is missing a bunch of things. Right? Kanban doesn't talk about product owners or backlogs or daily stand-ups and all that kind of stuff. And starting from Kanban, it's not the, it's It's not necessarily a problem. It definitely can be done. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, hey, folks that are already doing Scrum or thinking about doing Scrum, after you've been doing Scrum for a while, you might think about folding in some Kanban stuff. So if I look at the, sort of pure Scrum, I've got self-organizing teams, I've got my team members, all the way down to Scrum of Scrums. What I'm saying is, an example that you might do of mixing these things together is, yeah, you've still got self-organizing team member, et cetera, but instead of having sprint planning where you do all of that story estimation and the backlog grooming, let's do weekly story estimation. That's all I'm saying. Let's still do the daily stand-up. And instead of a sprint review, we're going to do a monthly review, or we're going to do a review whenever the stakeholders are available. Instead of doing a retrospective every iteration, we're going to do it weekly. We're still going to have a product backlog, et cetera, et cetera. But sprints, to the extent you can, in this example, they got rid of sprints. There's no more sprints. Now, maybe you're not ready to do that. That's fine. You can still get stories done and say, hey, we're gonna still have a retrospective when we get the iteration done, but we're gonna do this awesome one-piece flow thing. Releases, still get those. Scrum of Scrums gets replaced with the idea of stopping the line. Having a Scrum of Scrums is very useful, but mainly you're just sort of talking about what's going on and what are we thinking about and all that kind of stuff. But if you can build the whole product after every story, you've got that checkpoint of that I got those stories done on a regular basis or not. If so, what do you need to talk about? If not, well, you've got a lot to talk about. How can we solve this problem? Let's get people together, get the heads together, and solve this problem right now so we don't run into it again. And then we get back to the daily business. And then adding in things like the Kanban board, one-piece flow, work in progress limits, and multi-stage continuous integration, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. Okay, so what about synchronizing Scrum teams? So this works really well for individual teams, but what a lot of people are looking to Kanban for is actually synchronizing multiple Scrum teams or multiple Agile teams. So we've got the multiple teams, right? And we're talking about integrating things together. But if I'm getting stories done on a regular basis, every couple of days or every week or whatever, and then I'm integrating together, anything that I do is breaking the book for everybody. I'm going to disrupt all those teams. Is that really a great idea? Well, the alternative is to put off integration until later, and it's actually even worse. So it is actually better if you can solve this problem to integrate as fast as you possibly can. So how can we solve this problem? Well, what we can do is we can introduce multiple stages of integration. So the first stage is, as a team, does our stuff actually build and do the test run and pass? Otherwise, why do we have any business moving it on to the next level? It's like the same idea of, as an individual, before I check in, I should make sure that, from a sanity test perspective, it's working. So the integration, those are not, people or anything. It's automated. It's saying, we're going to take the work of these two teams because they're closely linked together, and whenever they're done with their story, they're going to merge it into another stream or branch, run continuous integration there. It's going to happen automatically. If it works, great. It gets passed on to the main line, just like if you were directly checking in. If not, it's a problem, and all of the teams working on that, based on that integration area, are going to be broken. But that's great because now we're fixing that together, and hopefully that happens infrequently because we're using a system and we find problems and fix them on a frequent basis. So problems should be an exception. And then eventually it all gets integrated together. So it's going to look something like this, right? Getting it working at the team level, the multi-team, and then the whole product. And that change, the reason it's animated is to show that we're trying to get that change all the way to the main line as fast as we possibly can, but no faster. Any problems, we want them to get stuck at the appropriate level, developer, team, multi-team. So to get this all working well requires a number of things. One of the most important things are the individuals and interactions, right? So part of what that's all about is having self-managed teams, cross-functional teams, having a product owner within the team, using user stories to interact between the various groups, between customers, product owner, and the team. That's all the individuals and interactions. It's absolutely important. But you need some infrastructure, right? So imagine you're driving down the road and there's no road. There's just grass and dirt roads. That's not a great traffic system. So the tooling here, think of it as the traffic system to enable flow, right? The people in the cars getting places, that's what's important. But without a good flow, you're not going to get to work on time. You're not going to get to that meeting on time. So you want a good structure to organize the work that you're doing. So one of those things is an Agile project management tool. Right? You got your SCM version control. Obviously, at AccuRev, that's what we're interested in, providing a good SCM tool like AccuRev to help with that structure and infrastructure to enable the good flow. And then on top of that, of course, you need your continuous integration system, which might be something like Antil Pro or Hudson or what have you. And these four things work together to provide the ultimate value here. Taking Kanban and self-organized teams and Agile project management, the SCM and continuous integration, you put those all together, and you're going to get that Nirvana that I talked about in the beginning at the multi-team level. Right? So when this all comes together, to the extent that you can apply these various techniques and tools, you're going to get something that looks like this, where you've got a whole product touch point after every story. After every story is complete, you have a check as to whether or not you're whole thing or not, because if it's broken, it isn't working. If it's working, it's working. And you have a working version of your product after every story is complete, and this scales up. We have customers that I've talked to that have 20 Scrum teams working together in this way. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've implemented this exactly, right? This really is Nirvana. I don't know a lot of people that are doing all of these techniques all at the same time. I know of a number of companies that are doing the multi-stage continuous integration, the cross-functional teams, backlogs, and all that, but they're not using Kanban on all teams. They're using Kanban on the 2 out of the 4 teams you see here. And then there are other folks using a combination of these techniques at the 20 Scrum team level. And then I know of one even that's doing it at the 80 team level. They have 80 interacting Scrum teams building a common product, some using Kanban, some not, some using continuous integration, some not. But they've been moving gradually towards this Nirvana because they can see that they're getting frequent feedback from customers, able to turn around quickly, whether it's for shipping or not, whether it may be just to get a demo for feedback, and then being able to get the revenue or the value back from the customer into the organization even more rapidly. Because at the end of the day, that's what keeps the company alive. So the touch points you get are with the stories. The product owner can say to the customer, I don't know what that means. It's not going any further until we figure that out. The team says, okay, you give us the story and you think it's important and all that, but it doesn't make any sense to us. It's not going any further until we figure that out. At the end of the day, it may not be able to get a story done. That's a problem. Why not? Why can't we finish it? Let's figure it out. Not go any further until we figure it out. It won't integrate with another team. Why? It's not going any further until we figure that out. Right? So you catch all these problems early as you possibly can before it gets to the final product, and you have that question less frequently of, why is this unshippable? Right? All these touch points all the way through on each individual story. And that is my talk. So here are some resources, and I think I'll pass it back to you, Hemant. You wanted to talk about a couple things, and then I think we have Q&A after that, right?
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Damon. So, folks, now you can reflect a bit upon this content that Damon just went through, and come up with questions that you want us to address. And while you're doing that, let me bring up my screen so I can actually, you can see my screen now. Okay. So think about questions you want to ask beyond, and I already have a few questions, and while you are coming up with your questions, what I'll do is I'll give a quick introduction to Synerzip so that those who don't know us will get a quick background about us. So here's about Synerzip in a nutshell. We are a software product development company. We work with typically small to mid-sized companies to help them expand their software development teams and do that in a high-quality manner. For each team, we have a dedicated team of software development professionals, and which extends logically their team and provides them full transparency to the work happening and all that. And given our expertise in Agile software development, we are able to really tailor the right discipline of software development for each company. Some companies who are in the very early stage of building a first version of the product may need much more rapid cycles of delivery, and on the other hand, those who are mature with a lot more of an installed base of of large customers may need a lot more rigorous testing and regression testing and all that, just as an example. The fourth point about Synerzip is we have a dual shore operation. We have a team in India and a team here on the US side, small team on the US side. And with the combination, we are able to provide a 50% cost advantage to our clients in doing software development. And the last point about Synerzip is the flexibility and control we are able to provide our clients. Any of our clients have the option to convert the team that works for them into their captive team whenever they feel like it. So all in all, that's what Synerzip is in a nutshell. The next page, as it refreshes on your screen, gives a glimpse of some of our clients, and you see most of them are small to mid-sized companies, typically venture-backed companies in the expansion stage. So that's just a few slides of overview. Now let's turn our attention to on this topic of Scrum and Kanban. So Damon, I'm going to take it. There are a number of questions here. Let me take one question which has been sitting here for a while, but I wanted to take at the end, which is what are the must-haves for the team to succeed with this? You talked a bit about infrastructure of continuous integration and so on. So beyond that, what would you consider, for example, test automation, having branches for each phase, source code branches and so on? So are there certain must-haves that a team should have in place before they can be successful with this approach?
Excellent question. I think there's sort of two aspects to that. I don't think there's any sort of necessary prerequisite. If you're already doing Scrum, then in my experience, it's completely compatible. The question is, where do we want to start? Like a simple place to start is to just throw up a task board. You know, there's no requirement for that other than, you know, whatever the $100 it is to throw up a task board and get some, you know, stickers up there. So the other aspect of that, which I think that's getting to is, you know, what are the leading indicators that it's going to be more successful than otherwise? And I think you hit on some of them, which is automated testing in any Agile environment is very important. And as one of the other questions that came up about when in the world am I doing integration testing, I would say taking a look at that book by Jez Humble is a very good place to take a look, because there are a number of things that may not have been seen as a problem, you know, previously, and maybe you solve some of these things in Scrum, but Kanban is really going to put a fine edge on it. There's a lot of benefits to Kanban, but it's really like taking, you know, you've got the car up and running. Now you're going to go to, you know, Daytona. Boy, oh boy, is that going to, you know, be finely tuned. You know, you get the benefits of that. But again, you know, you can apply these principles one by one. So I would say, you know, automation is important. And then one of the most important things I think is that you want to make sure that you've gotten to the point where, especially if you're starting with Scrum, your story sizes are pretty small. You know, the smaller your stories are, the better off. If, you know, I remember I was at a presentation in the Ukraine recently, and I heard about one team that was doing one story per iteration. One story. You know, they had a good-sized dev team on there, but they were getting one story done per iteration. That's way too big. Yes, you could apply Kanban to that, but you know, you're going to have one big task board that says it's work in progress the whole iteration, because you're not working on anything else. So I think those are some of the things: test automation and small story size, perhaps being the two most.
Picking up on the small story size, would you provide to audience a rule of thumb what's an appropriate story size to take on?
Sure, absolutely. I think, you know, we were talking earlier there, and folks can get more details, I believe, in one of your emails upcoming or whatever. You're actually providing a user story thing coming.
Yes. In fact, let's put a plug, for instance, you brought it up. So our next month's webinar is likely to be on this topic of how to break big stories into small. But with that, take your answer.
Okay, so I think there's nothing quite like doing it to get practiced at it, right? So the more you try to break stories down, the better you'll get at it. But as far as the goal, if you've got monthly iterations, I think a good goal is that, you know, most stories should be a week or less in size. You may have some that are bigger, but you want to get them, you know, down to say the, you know, 5% of the length of the iteration. So if you have a week iteration, a weekly iteration, then you'd want to get your story size down to a day, a couple of days. Now you might have a story that you're working on that takes all week, and that's fine. But you want to work on that and get them more and more frequently smaller and smaller.
Well, there are, as usual, and particularly in this topic, Damon, a number of other questions, but we'll have to just pause here, given and respect the time commitment we made for everybody who came on the webinar. So thank you so much, Damon, and thank you all of you for attending the webinar. Stay tuned for our next month's webinar, which we said is most likely the topic we are rallying around, is breaking big stories down to small. So we'll reconvene next month.
Excellent. Actually, you know what? One more point on that about the extra questions. If you look at my blog, damonpoole.blogspot.com, I've just started a series on this exact topic of Scrum and Kanban, like chocolate and peanut butter. So if you have questions, feel free to follow up there as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Damon, again, and thanks all of you for attending.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.